Often a mutation has a negative effect on an organism. Also often, a mutation has no noticeable effect. But let's imagine a rarer scenario, where a mutation happens to help the organism adapt to its current environment. For example, maybe it results in thicker fur in an environment that is cold all year round. In this scenario, keeping the critter warm increases its chance of survival and reproduction. All things being equal, this individual will have an advantage. Their traits have a better chance of being passed on in the next generation. This process is called natural selection. What is advantageous in one environment can be disadvantageous in another. For example, we can imagine that in time the climate will change, eventually to be warmer. Now the selective pressure may favor alleles for thinner fur, and then, all things being equal, the frequency of the thicker fur trait will begin to drop. In other words, what selection favors will change, and can be unpredictable as the weather, arguably even more so. Natural selection is often biologists' favorite mechanism of evolution because it results in adaptations that are fun to explore and understand. Detecting natural selection is also quite useful, but we'll talk about that later in the class. It also should be noted that natural selection is not in charge of evolution. It is simply one of 4 mechanisms. Just because a trait is adaptive does not mean it will win out over the other traits. There's still a chance component. One way to think of this is a deck of cards. 2 players are both dealt a hand at random. One player has a pair of aces, the other a pair of jacks. Now, aces are better than jacks for this particular game. But if there are still cards to be dealt, the player with a pair of jacks could still easily win. Natural selection can be thought of as a similar process. Some alleles can have advantages and some disadvantages. But the chance aspect of life still impacts which allele will get the upper hand. In studies of nature, we often operate by seeing the outcome of natural selection. If a researcher comes along and finds evidence for a rapid allele frequency change in a population over time, they would have 2 competing hypotheses for why that happened. One hypothesis is that the change was coincidental, caused by chance and genetic drift alone. The allele just happened to get sampled very frequently, even though it had no advantage over other alleles. In essence, the allele won the reproductive lottery. The other hypothesis is that the allele was under natural selection. The allele did have an advantage, allowing it to increase in frequency more quickly than one would reasonably expect from chance alone. Thus, the researcher can use statistics and probability to determine whether chance alone can explain the increases in allele frequencies. This is one of several ways we can statistically test whether natural selection has impacted the spread of a trait.